video, we're going to be doing a power jack repair on an Acer Aspire 3680. Now, I'm pretty certain the power jack is bad because we smelled it, and we smelled burning coming from the power jack, so it's probably pretty fried in there. But what I always like to do anyway is check the power adapter and make sure that's okay, because if that's not okay, then that might be a quick fix right there. Now, I take the black lead on my voltmeter, I put it on the outside of the tip of the power adapter, and see how I stuck a paper clip into the tip there? I put the red, the positive, on the tip, touch it to the paper clip. And I only use the paper clip when I can't actually fit the red lead into the tip of the power adapter. And we're getting 19 volts there. So we know the power adapter is good. Now, you don't need to use the paper clip if the actual tip of the positive fits into the hole. And also remember, you don't want to touch the black and the red together when you're hooking up the power adapter like that, because you're going to get a short circuit. It's going to arc. Okay, I threw the foam down there so I don't scratch the surface of the computer, and I flipped the computer over. And we're just going to start taking components out of the computer now, because we got to get to the power jack, which is usually attached to the motherboard. When we move this back cover, we see the RAM. We also see the wireless card and the modem. We're pulling the RAM out. And I'm going to take the hard drive out now. There may be a screw or two holding it in, and then it pops right out. Now I'm unhooking the antenna from the wireless card, and then I'm going to pull the wireless card out. It's important to unhook these antennas, as you'll see in a minute when we try to get the screen off. And the rest of it we could leave for now. Now I'm going to pull out the one screw here, which is going to free up the CD drive. Okay, now I want to get the keyboard and the screen off. This will give us access to other parts of the computer and allow us to take the top cover off of the bottom cover. There's two screws in the back that are actually holding on what I call the hinge cover plate. Now, the hinge cover plate is the thing that actually covers the screws for the keyboard. So you can't get the keyboard off or the screen off until you take off this hinge cover plate, which is that plate right above the keyboard. I'm going to pry it off. You should be able to just pull it. Now, if you feel like you're forcing it, it's possible there are screws on the underside of the computer holding it in. So just to be safe, I'm going to unscrew every screw on the underside of the computer that may be possibly holding it in. How do I know that those screws might be possibly holding it in? Because they're lined up directly under the hinge cover plate. So just to be safe, I'm going to take them all out. They may not even be holding it in, but if they are, we got to get them out. Okay, once we're sure we got all the screws out of there, a few more, we're going to flip the computer back over and remove that plate. That'll give us access to the keyboard and allow us to remove the screen. My goal when I do this job is to basically remove that screen as fast as possible. I want to get the screen out of the picture. That's going to be the most unwieldy thing because it flips up. It's a delicate thing. You don't want to scratch it. So now we pull again the hinge cover plate, and it comes off a lot better this time. Now it may or may not, this might be luck. It may or may not have been screwed in, but at least we're not forcing it. Sometimes you have to really jiggle it. It's snapped in there. And once we get that out, now we have access to the keyboard. Now, screws that hold in the keyboard are usually at the top of the keyboard. Take those screws out from the top of the keyboard and then see if the keyboard can flip up. If the keyboard can flip up, then we know the keyboard's not screwed in from the bottom like that one, and we can just pull it right out. Oops. Now, I'm pulling the wireless antenna through the bottom of the computer up to the top of the computer. Now, because we actually unhooked it from the wireless card, we have access to it now. If they were still attached to the wireless card, we'd have to flip the computer back over, close the case again, and it could get a little tiresome. And then this one over here that I'm working on now is the LCD cable. This is what gives the graphics to the screen. And I'm just using a flathead screwdriver just to pull on each end. Be delicate with that. There's probably about 40 wires going into that big white connector. They're very tiny. You don't want to mess them up, so just be careful when you're handling that. And now that the antenna and the LCD cable are unhooked from the motherboard, we can get the screen off. The wireless antenna usually go to the top of the screen, so it's not just the LCD cable that's the only wire to the screen. It's usually those wireless antenna. And there's 4 screws here on the top holding the screen in. Comes right off. Now I'm just going to look for any screw that appears to be holding the top plate together with the bottom plate. And I want to unattach the top plate from the bottom plate so we can get to the motherboard. So let's just look for every screw we can that's actually holding them two together. Unhook any ribbon cables you see there, like I just unhooked the touchpad ribbon cable. If you don't unhook that and then you start prying the top and bottom plate apart, you could rip that ribbon cable. So just give it another look over, make sure you got all the screws. Now we're going to flip it around and take out the remaining screws from the bottom. When we do this, and then we try to, rip the top plate apart from the bottom plate, well, rip isn't a good word, but when we try to take the two pieces apart, the motherboard is going to come with one of the pieces. It's either going to come with the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter which one it is. We'll be able to have access to the motherboard after we get it unsandwiched from the top and bottom plate here. I'm being pretty reckless with the screws here, throwing them all into one big pile. I've taken apart a few 3680s in my time, so I know where all the screws go. Use the video we talked about earlier. If you're a beginner and you're not sure where all the screws go, use the video that you were shown earlier about the best way to get screws out of a laptop. Different people have different systems on doing that. And then make sure you get all the screws out. And then try to take the two plates apart, or the two covers apart. If it comes apart easy, you know you got all the screws. If there seems like a part that's jammed a little, make sure you get all the screws. And if you're sure you have all the screws, look for maybe a plastic hinge or something that's holding those two plates together. And in this computer, that yellow S-Video port on the side was actually jutting out and holding the top part of the case to the bottom part of the case, as well as a small little speaker connector right there in the upper right-hand corner. So between those two things, they were holding the case on. So we had all the screws out, so that was good. Now, if you see what we're dealing with here, the power jack is attached to a separate circuit board from the motherboard, and this is good for us. So let's get the motherboard out, and then we'll hit that separate board. Now, I was just pointing to a white arrow on the motherboard. We've talked about this before. The white arrows are usually always on the motherboard to give you an idea of what screws you need to remove. In other words, you don't need to remove every screw on the motherboard to get the motherboard out. Usually only the ones with the white arrows pointing to it. And you'll see that there was only one screw holding this motherboard in. So you want to pull the motherboard out gently without forcing anything. There might be cables still holding it in there. There might be something, screw still, somewhere still holding